Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Joining me today is Micah Current. Micah, what is going on with the weather in Ohio? I've only been here for a few months now, and I feel like I was wearing shorts and t-shirt and having the best time of my life playing outside to now I'm telling my kids they need to dress in winter clothing to go to school.
I couldn't answer you. I was telling somebody yesterday it's 80 one day in summer, and the next day it's winter and 40. So
Yeah,
that's pretty much where we are. I think right now it's 39 degrees where I'm at, and
yeah,
yesterday we got up to almost 82 degrees. So
yeah.
um, and I went to lunch with my wife yesterday, and you would have thought we were the weather people not well on the news and the Weather Channel, like covering a hurricane because that's how hard the wind was blowing. Um,
Yeah.
it's just been a crazy spring, man. Like a lot of rain, a lot of wind, and a lot of rain this spring. I've never seen anything like it. Plenty of
Yeah.
rain in Ohio, but not the wind that we've been seeing.
Yeah. And it's been interesting too because I just bought a planter that was on wheels, like a self-watering raised planter. And my kids were interested in buying stuff, so I bought some stuff and I'm looking at it and it's like, oh, can't plant this till May. I'm like, well, we're getting close to May and it's warm now. I can plant this. And I'm glad I didn't start planting anything because it would have been in big trouble today.
Well, if you look
But
at your
yeah,
phone, like this Thursday, it's supposed to be 80 again.
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I just don't understand.
But no, it's actually interesting because like when I'm working, because again, like my office is up in the third story of our house, which is kind of like a walking attic. And I was like, man, it's hot up here. So instead of me plugging in the AC unit, I just kind of open up the windows, open up the vent, and then just had the air flow through and it cooled it down quite a bit. Well, I didn't close the window. So when I came up here to record, it was frigid up here. So I had to go shut the windows and like, oh no. And I feel like bad because to get to my office, I have to go through my son's room, which means that if it was cold up here, I'm sure my son was freezing. All that cold air was probably just trickling down the stairs, going right into his room. So,
Well,
parent
we
of the
have
year.
this is the time of year where we turn like the heat on and like leave it down on the lowest setting, like just so that it'll like 64 degrees or 65 degrees, and if our house gets down to that cool, it'll kick on. And then the same thing for the air when it gets warmer, like we just bump it up, and then so last night I turned it. I hadn't had the heat on in almost 2 weeks, over 2 weeks probably, and same deal. Uh, I turned it. I turned the heat on, and I don't know if it kicked on or not last night. I don't know how cold it got, but
Mm,
when we woke up this morning, it was 39.
yeah. Oh goodness. Yeah. It's wild. It is wild with this weather. And speaking of wild, Micah, do you have a stories gone wild for us?
I don't. I haven't. I was thinking about that over the weekend,
Well,
and well, I shared on the show that I've been back in grad school,
yeah.
and we're kind of nearing the end of the semester, and I think I got an email on Thursday last week or Friday, and it was an email from the university, like a newsletter kind of thing, and it was like, "Hey, only 15 days of class left in the semester," and I just panicked. I was like, "Oh no, I've got to get all my work done." Kind of related, but kind of not related. Scott, as somebody who's done camp ministry and somebody who's done youth ministry and children's ministry, you know that when you order pizza for an event, how quickly that pizza can disappear, right?
Yeah.
You can order a ton of pizza, and those kids will just scarf it down in a matter of minutes. So last Friday, the college I work at hosts this big festival in the spring called Spark Fest, and it's through the
Mm-hmm.
College of Creative Arts, and music does stuff, and art and theater and architecture, and all the arts come together, and they have this huge festival outside, and they have live performances, and we give away free food, we do raffles, we sell t-shirts, all this stuff. So this is only the second year that we've done that. Last year we ordered um, we ordered pizza and an ice cream truck for for the food, and so it worked so well that we decided to do the same thing this year. And the idea behind it was that it would be free. And then last year, we ordered the same amount of pizza, and there was so much left over. People were more interested in the ice cream than the pizza. This year, we decided to do the same thing, and then we had several meetings leading up to the actual event, and we were like, should we order less pizza because there was so much left over? Scott, I ordered $300 in pizza, and it was gone in 20 minutes this year. And we think that it was due to the timing that we gave it away. Last year, we gave the pizza and the ice cream away around the same time, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The festival went to 4 or 5 o'clock. And we think that it was because it was closer to dinner and not closer to lunch, and people weren't really interested in the free pizza. This year, we gave it right as the festival started, and it was closer to lunchtime. And so folks came over. They're like, hey, pizza, free pizza. Right. Like people were just walking through the quad, and they were like, free food. And so we gave over $300 of pizza away in around 20 minutes. And then we sold over 400 servings of ice cream in like less than 2 hours. So I've worked my fair share of youth lock-ins and other youth events where, we have all the hot and ready pizzas you can eat, and somehow they all get ate. So yeah. So what about you? Do you have the crazy story? You always have better stories than I do.
Well, so I feel like my how do I say this? I feel like being in a youth position again and actually doing youth ministry and children's ministry, I feel like everywhere I've done it, the culture has always been so different. So for an example, when I'm in Youngstown pastoring, I had a small youth group, but they were excited to be there. I would say something and it was like, okay, they'd listen, they do whatever, and it'd be a good time. Same thing, living in a rural Virginia, have a great youth group. We go do stuff, have fun. Everyone's very kind, respectful, very same, like, being in the inner city of Youngstown. Then I'm in like Columbus and like kind of like the most affluent community, high end of Columbus. And literally, I feel like there's at least one student, maybe one or two students that I feel like I have to constantly say, hey, we can't go on. Like, we can't get to the fun part unless I get through the devotional part. I can't. Yeah. And then we get to the fun part and it's like, we can't even have fun because you keep messing around and doing stuff. So for an example, have you heard of diaper wars?
Yeah, you shared that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay. So I set up this, our fellowship center with like play mats and different like obstacles that people can hide behind. And we had a good mix of guys and girls there. And it's like we're getting everything set up. I'm trying to talk about the rules, and this guy just keeps knocking the barriers over. So then we have to pick them back up. I'm like, we can't play the game if we don't. So then we finally get to the point where we're playing the game, and then there'll be things that happen. They go, oh, yeah, you're out. I'm like, well, no, you're not. Wait, you didn't say that. It's like, I couldn't even get through the rules because I had to keep stopping and saying no. But even then, like the one guy who was causing all the problems, who was like, and I feel like this is always like in every movie, every book, and even in real life, where you have the person who it's like, oh yeah, I'm the best, and they are very confident in themselves, and then they're like the first people eliminated in like dodgeball or something. And that's exactly what happened. Like, this guy got hit, like was the first one eliminated. And again, like, I'm playing on the girls' team because they have less numbers. We have 3 hits and you're out, kind of a rule. And literally, this guy gets mad, throws the diapers, decides to go and knock over not the opposing side, the people he's going to get knock over their barriers, but his own team's barriers. And then he walks away and he puts both fists up in the air with middle fingers as high. And I'm thinking, what in the world? So I have to be like, no, dude, no, no, that's not appropriate for church. Like if you do that at your public school, then that's on you, but don't do it here in the church, man. Come on. So, and then of course, the kids are having a field day with it. It's like, oh yeah, you're so good, but you're like the weakest link on your team. So I don't know. It's just weird. It's just weird being in I would always think that, Pete, there's always the assumption that being in like lower income communities and being in the inner city, that those are going to be like the roughest kids, the kids that cause the most problems. And literally, I've never had that experience. I feel like when I've done ministry in like very inner city or the the most urban communities, those kids are like fantastic because they're excited to be there. They're hungry. They want to, they're hungry for the word. They're hungry for community, for healthy communities and relationships. And it's just great. And then you get to like a more suburban place and it's like, oh, nope. Like, so I don't know. It's just weird. I feel like what's always stereotypically should be the opposite, but then I find that not to be true.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I was thinking about the illustration you're giving about there's always one kid. There's always one kid that thinks they're the best at it, and then they get really mad or frustrated when they're the first one out.
Yeah.
But yeah. Oh, I was going to ask you too. Like, how's I said something about schoolwork and being kind of like stressed because I've done a lot of writing over the weekend. How's your semester going?
So I actually have a meeting. So, well, that's a good question. Like, it's funny because
I don't think you said anything this semester, anything at all about your schooling, and I've sat here and.
So here's the thing. Like all my other classes, all my classes have been great. I feel like when it comes to assignments, I'll do the assignment and I get I'll get an A. So I'm not, maybe an A or B plus. So I'm pretty good. This semester, this class, like it's probably the most enjoyable class I've been in. But the paperwork you would assume would be probably the more basic, easy thing. Because it's just hermeneutics. It's basically just like basic. This is like my third hermeneutics class. But what I find interesting is we're getting to the final paper, and right before we dismiss from our class, the professor is very clear. He goes, if you do everything right and you hit everything and you write a pretty good paper, that's going to be a B paper. You really have to do something special for an A. So he's kind of already saying like, if you want an A, like it has to like blow my mind pretty much. I'm like, okay, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. But then he also said, this is also the shortest paper I have to write. It's only like 10 to 12 pages. And then not only that, he says, the professor says, basically the whole premise of the paper is there's a problem within the church and you're going to try to solve it. So think about you're addressing a bunch of like church leaderships about a potential issue in the church and you're going to talk them through it. So it's like, okay, so it's kind of like a TED talk maybe. But then I think the confusing thing is all the stuff that you're told about writing exegetical papers. It's like, yeah, don't do that stuff. Like I want it to be very bare bones, very small. So like, don't quote anybody. If you write something, like sum everything up and then give credit to the person. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like this is going to be, after years of saying, show your work, and you're writing these big 30, 40 page papers. Now you're going to go write a paper that's half the size, very condensed, but you still need to have the same oomph, but you can't really use a lot of quotes or anything else. You're going to have to basically take a big quote and say, okay, I have to sum up this quote now, and then just say, okay, here it is. And I'm thinking, my goodness, like, so I actually have a meeting with our professor tomorrow because I have to I just want to make sure I'm on the right track before I start writing this paper, because I feel like I'm doing good and then I write it and then I'll get a grade and I'm like, wait, why is my grade a lot lower than I expected? Because I felt like I did everything and I'm not getting the results of the work that I'm putting into it. So I'm gonna, and then it's funny because then I'll have other people in the class contact me. Hey, can you help me with my paper? Like, not write it, but hey, I'm very confused. I'm thinking, dude, I'm confused. Like, don't be talking to me. Like, you're the wrong person to ask. I can't help you do anything with this paper because I have no clue what to do. So, yeah. So, I mean, it's been good. I mean, in the meantime, before I could have my interview with my professor, like, I mean, I've got all my collateral reading done. I had to read 750 extra pages of stuff, and then I had to watch 4 videos and write a brief summary. I got that done, but all that stuff's not due till the 1st of May, and then my paper's due in like 11 days. So I've kind of written it. My final paper is due to 11 days.
Gotcha.
But I mean, I've gotten like I kind of have the framework for it. I just need to clarify things and go, okay, am I on the right track? Because I really don't want to get too far in this paper and find out I'm doing the absolutely wrong thing and then have to go and rip everything up. Like, I want to kind of, here's kind of how I'm going to flow. Now I'm going to go ahead and write my paper and then kind of be good. So hopefully that will take care of everything. But yeah, it's been rough, and not necessarily rough by work. It's just rough where I think, oh, this is a great paper, I'm very proud of this, and then it's like, oh yeah, this is like a, B, a B minus. I'm thinking, what? Like, really? Oh, you didn't do this? I'm like, yeah, I did. It's right here. Like, well, I did address this thing. Like, wait, what are you talking about? So I have to go, and then he'll break it down. I'll go, oh, okay, now I see. Now I understand your mind process. But still, it's like, oh gosh. But yeah,
How many classes are you taking? Just one?
just one. So yeah, it's one class per semester, and I have 6 classes, 6 core classes, and then I have my writing thesis, and then I start working on my project. So literally, summer's my last class, and then in the fall I have my writing thesis, and then after that, I have like 2 to 3 years that I have to work on my project and finish it and defend it and
All that fun
graduate
stuff.
and all that fun stuff. Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm doing 2 this semester, and so the first I started last fall. I took one in the fall and I took one in the winter, and it was fine. This semester I'm taking 2. It's a little bit more difficult because I'm just trying to navigate working full time and making sure I get the work done in each class. And um, thankful that my wife kind of gave me this tip of like making a spreadsheet for each of my classes and like making a list of my assignments and check boxes and what I need to do. And so yeah, I mean, I'm in a history of education for America class right now, and it's been a very interesting class. The teacher, like you said, is kind of comparable to yours. She's kind of tough, but she's also honest with you, and will be like, "Hey, could you give me a little bit more? This is great, but how about you give me a little bit more?" And so, you can give, a paper to her, and she'll give you feedback and give it back to you, and same with discussion forums and different things like that. My other class has just would be like right up your alley because we have a big part of my program is electives, and the other part of it is core classes. And the electives, I'm taking classes from our division, and one of the bigger programs in our division is esports and video games and video game design, and it's called ETBD, which is Emerging Technology and Business Design. And so I'm taking an IMS class, Interactive Media Studies 572 or whatever, and it's all about esports and the evolution of esports and the history of esports. And it's just been really, really fun. You create brackets and talk about different Super Smash Brothers and just like, it's been really fun to just take that class. And I spent most of my weekend writing. You were talking about writing earlier. I spent most of my weekend writing my final project for that class because, like I said, I only have 3 weeks of the semester left, and then the week after commencement I start summer classes, and so I have 3 classes over the summer, and it's going to be, if I can make it through that, we're golden.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been as we move into our main topic, you mentioned something like, man, life's been wild, and I want to kind of throw out a disclaimer before we dive into this, but we've went through and we kind of discussed the Hillsong documentary that was put on by Discovery Plus. We've talked about mega churches and kind of how it's a whole different system and a whole different way of doing ministry. And sometimes we see a lot of influencers, whether it's on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, kind of, bashing and ripping apart mega churches and mega church leaders. And then there's some people who come to their defense and saying, hey, we shouldn't judge people. So I'm saying all that because I want to talk about it, because there's been there's been some things that I've found out recently that I'm kind of want to address, because I feel like when it comes to mega churches, it almost seems like they're kind of either they're the scapegoat or they're the bully in the room that everybody wants to fight against, that wants to band together and tackle. They're the Goliath that they want to see fall down and get its head chopped off, and it seems like just recent, like probably the most recent story came out last week. James Macdonald, he was the former pastor of Harvest Bible Church out in Chicago. He was also on the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. There's the audio of him and Mark Driscoll. And there was another pastor, I can't remember, but James Macdonald and Mark Driscoll were basically bragging about how big their churches are and how they have all these multi-site campuses and how they're doing everything right, and making fun of the other pastor that he doesn't have like a satellite church, that he doesn't have a following of thousands of people attending his church, and kind of was like making fun and tackling that. Well, James Macdonald was fired in 2019 and was deemed unfit for ministry. But then recently, and this was on March 22nd, he was arrested in California because apparently the details is he was parking his truck when he hit a vehicle in an adjacent spot. A 59-year-old woman got out of the other vehicle, and then Macdonald allegedly jumped out of his truck and attacked the victim. Witnesses came to the woman's aid, and she was taken to the hospital. They also found a gun in Macdonald's truck. And basically, it was kind of hidden that, hey, we don't know, there's an incident, but they didn't reveal names. And then eventually they came out saying that it was this former minister that ended up attacking this woman. And there's still a court date. And of course, his legal team saying, oh no, everything's is blown out of proportion. James Macdonald's innocent. So we'll see what happens with that court case. Back on April 3rd, Transformation Church, which has been under fire for their elaborate Easter services, singing Rihanna and Keisha songs and having these big elaborate Easter service. They recently hired a person on their staff, Carl Lentz, which, again, from the Hillsong documentary, was the one who had an affair and was very, again, was alleged of being spiritual and sexual abuse. There's allegations against Carl Lentz. Well, he is hired, and they're basically here to help Transformation, at least from what the executive pastor says. We gladly welcome Carl Lentz to our Transformation Church staff, helping Transformation Church with strategy as we continue to move forward in our vast vision. We believe in Carl, his marriage, his skill set, and his restoration. So they're like, we see quality in this guy, and we're going to help him to move our church forward with our big vision. And then 2 years ago, or at least I found out about it a week ago, but I guess this story's 2 years old. But apparently Mark Driscoll kicked a family out of his church because their teenage son happened to kiss one of Driscoll's teenage daughters. And not only did he kick these people out of the church, but he also filed charges with police against them, and also told his church not to talk to them, to shun them. And this is all coming up from a former head of security at his church in Phoenix, basically saying that he had a private investigator surveilling this family 24/7. And it goes to show that as much as people are like, you're just jealous of mega churches, they're really doing what Christ commanded them to, really preach the gospel and spread it out to the ends of the earth and everything else. But there's something doesn't seem right about these three stories. Like this does not sound right. And all of them are mega churches or former mega church pastors. And there seems to be a lot of issues, a lot of personnel issues, a lot of crazy thing. So Micah, I mean, these are just like snapshots, headlines of just these three situations. What are your thoughts on all this? Are mega churches kind of, the evil empire, or is it just not necessarily that they're bad, it's just they have bad people running them? Like, I don't get it. Explain it to me.
Well, if I had the answer, I probably wouldn't be here in this moment.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like we probably wouldn't be here if we had it figured out.
exactly.
My immediate response is with people like Driscoll and what's his
Macdonald?
name? No, not Macdonald. The other one from Hillsong.
Carl Lentz.
Yes, thank you, Carl Lentz. My immediate response biblically is: has there been reconciliation?
Mm-hmm.
And has there been restoration? And has there been appropriate steps to get these folks back into leadership roles? And if so, my other question would be, what was that process? And has there been, have the bridges been rebuilt after they've been burned?
Mm-hmm.
How do other people feel about those folks in leadership? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're, not to make this about politics, but people don't like certain politicians because of certain allegations that have been, brought up against them. Mm-hmm. And what's the difference? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In one way, shape, or form, you're kind of like an elected official, right? Like there, you go, you interview for a position, if you're accustomed to the life of the Church of God, like you and I are, Scott, you'll have what's called a candidating weekend. You meet with the church, and then you try out, and then you get voted on, and then if you get the vote of confidence, you get the offer. Mega churches are a lot different because they can, again, depending on the association, if it's truly non-denominational, they don't really have to abide by anything. They can just hire you. I think that's kind of where most larger churches sit. So if you're, I don't know, Scott, if you're, let's say you're Hillsong Church and you want Stephen Furtick from Elevation, and Stephen Furtick's available because he's no longer at Elevation. Hillsong's gonna be like, hey, Stephen, you want to come be our pastor? And pretty much it's a done deal. Like there's not really a hiring process as much as it's like, oh, Stephen Furtick's available. Let's get him. So, but back to the conversation about reconciliation, like there were several instances. We'll just use the illustration of Driscoll and the illustration of Carl Lentz that would make me think that they would never be employable in a church again. And I just want to know how, how they got back into leadership in a church, and is it just a matter of time before something happens where they're out of leadership again? Because like if you listen to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, you would think that Mark Driscoll would never pastor a church again.
Oh yeah.
If you watch the Hillsong documentary and listen to the stuff about Carl Lentz, it's pretty damning. I mean, it really is. It really is. Sexual assault is no joke, and the guy was accused of basically raping women. Yeah. And yet he's allowed to be in leadership at a church. And I've shared on this podcast before, Scott, that I've known pastors that have been let go from their jobs from churches for far less than sexual assault or abuse of power. And so I'm just kind of perplexed as to how they ended up back in leadership.
Well, and you brought at the beginning of this discussion, I guess rant. You mentioned about how, what was the restoration process? And that's the one thing, like even when we talked about Matt Chandler and his restoration and how we were confused about why he got fired in the first place, or why he got kind of that leave of absence in the first place. And then they said, and even it said Christianity Today, ask about the restoration process, and they didn't get back to them. And I feel like a lot of times with these, these at one point, these big name celebrity pastors, when they do have a fall of grace, when they do have to take a sabbatical retreat or a healing retreat or whatever language that they use, they come back, they're back into these positions, whether at the same church or at a different church. And it's like, what was the restoration process? Now, granted, we haven't really been hearing much about Matt Chandler since his restoration, which, okay, a good thing. We're not hearing a lot of hoopla. But Mark Driscoll, I mean, when you listen to the podcast and you hear all the stuff that he did and everything else, and you're just like, okay, how can this guy be a leader of a church? Then he becomes the leader of the church. And it's like, okay, well, maybe, just maybe, some of that behavior, some of those things that he did at Mars Hill that kind of led to its implosion, maybe he is reformed, maybe he's changed. But not only just, excommunicating family because a person kissed the 17-year-old daughter, his 17-year-old daughter, but the fact that there's other issues. There have been some of the similar things that he did at Mars Hill that's happening here at Trinity. Even like one of the things that the security guard says, that there is like a 1 to 10 rating scale about your loyalty to Mark Driscoll. If you're a volunteer, if you're staff, and if you drop below a certain number, you are then no longer asked to serve, or you are fired from your position. And it's a loyalty scale. And it's like, wait a minute. That's not right. Like, and like you said, like, I know a lot of pastors who have been fired unjustly for things that are not fireable offenses, or things where they get let go from churches over dumb things. And yet here we're seeing things that are people doing awful things, and very rarely are we seeing any type of blowback. But I think the thing that really boggles my mind is that even though there's a history of abuse, even though we're seeing kind of this bullying mentality from pastors that influence, other staff, that kind of crashes down to trickles out throughout the congregation, and yet people still want to go and attend this church.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why? And I think that's the crazy thing. Like, why do people want to attend these big churches knowing that you're, kind of supporting this type of behavior by being in attendance? And, and if you're giving money or tithing, then, you're kind of giving into that too. And it's just, I don't know. I just feel like it's going to be one of those things where something's going to happen. And let's just say in a couple years, we're going to see another big implosion at Trinity where Mark Driscoll's pastoring at. Mark Driscoll's going to left. Everybody's going to be hurting. Everybody's going to be in shambles. And then what? We get another documentary kind of telling that. And what are we going to hear? We're probably going to hear the same things. We're probably going to hear the same stories of just this overreach of power, and how they're, and I think that's the thing. Like, even when you think about Mars Hill and everything that went wrong with Mars Hill, I mean, now that Mark Driscoll's kind of back in a lead pastor position, do you think that he's going to make some changes to the operations manual or the bylaws that's going to kind of cover up some of those weak spots to give him more power, so that no one can kind of, oust him or say anything or do whatever to get him out of that power, if he is kind of using his power in a very non-biblical way? Like, I mean, I don't know.
So what kind of something that I kind of shared earlier, do you think it's the non-denominational thing? Not saying that that what they're doing is is even okay or remotely okay. What I'm saying though is that, like, for example, UMC or Church of God or whoever, you hold credentials through, you're holding ordination through, your licensing and all that stuff. If you or I were to do something like that and we were to get fired from our job, you bet your bottom dollar, that the state ministry office is going to come in and take your credentials.
Well, here's the thing though, because if we look back to like Driscoll, I mean, technically it's non-denomination,
Right.
but Driscoll got his ordination through the Reformed, through
Okay.
for the Reformed church, or I guess it'd be like Reformed Calvinism, and I'm and yeah. So if all this stuff happened, and even like other, like, I mean, there's even in the podcast they said that they had other people like a Tim Keller or a John Paul Tripp, like, would try to and speak or be on that board to investigate everything, and even they're saying like, oh my gosh, like this thing is absolutely bonkers. And yet I think the reason why Driscoll didn't lose any of his credentials is because he had success.
Hmm.
He had a large church, he had satellite, and that's at the end of the day. Well, he was ministering the gospel to thousands of people. And because he was ministering to the gospels of thousands of people, even though his ego took him, even though he has narcissistic behavior, whatever the case may be, even though he screwed up, and there's a lot of details of that, but at the end of the day, he was very successful of preaching the gospel to an unreached generation. And it's getting the gospel to Washington State, where a lot of people don't follow Jesus, and a lot of people became Christ followers through his ministry. So with that, because he is successful, and because he has driven this high profile clout of having these big, made a big name for himself, that even if he did something, of course he's going to come back and they're going to give him a job somewhere, because he has already proven that success. Same thing with James Macdonald. Yeah, James Macdonald's not pastoring, but yet he is traveling around and he's speaking at places. He has if he does a little devotional or a little preaching on his YouTube page, and just, sitting in his office with a webcam and preaching the gospel, he ends up attracting over 1 million views and has over a million followers. And it's like, because you have that clout,
And yet you can't get people to come to church on Sunday, like the regular church.
Exactly.
Like the church down the street.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, and I think that's kind of the big thing. It's like, well, and I think just kind of in the American society mind, the reason why I think a lot of people are attracted to bigger churches is because there's this idea that, well, they're going to have more programs, they're going to have better things for my family, and blah, 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 where a smaller church will not. Even a mid church may have some of that, but they may not have everything. So it's like, well, we're not going to go. We'll go to this bigger church because they have everything. It's like it's like I could go to a sit-down restaurant where it's more tailored, or I can go to a buffet. And I think a lot of times we see mega churches as buffet because they have anything, and anything you could possibly want, you can get at a mega church. So they go, not realizing that, you could be setting yourself up for some spiritual abuse and some spiritual trauma.
Yeah, I had a friend years ago who worked at a really large church, and he saw pretty much the writing on the wall, and there were some things that were not okay, ethically, and he and his wife felt convicted about it, and so they left. They went and pastored somewhere else, and they just felt the conviction in their hearts that they needed to get out of there. However, it wasn't like this, like, oh, we're going to fight the man kind of thing because this isn't right. However, it's like you're saying, Scott, it may be too big, the church may be too successful, the pastor may be too popular, almost to a celebrity style status. They're nationally known. You have all these things. You're not going to stop that train. You can stop supporting it and you can walk away from it, but chances are you're not going to get you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to stop the church from being that church, if that makes sense. And you look at churches like Hillsong. The stuff that we saw in that documentary was pretty ridiculous. And any, if you or I were pastoring a church of 100 or 200 people, and any of that kind of stuff happened, we would be out of a job for the rest of our life. But because it's such a global phenomenon, and the brand, as they talk about, and the celebrity status of somebody like Houston or Lentz, like, you just have this notoriety about you, right? Like, I small disclaimer, I watched church online yesterday because I got a new piano, and I got it delivered, and somebody they brought it to our house right around the time we were getting ready to head out the door to go to church. We just decided to watch it online instead. I was flipping, the service I was watching was over, so I turned on Peacock, the streaming app Peacock. That's NBC's app. And wouldn't you know, the first thing on the live feed of channels was Joel Osteen. That church was packed. And no matter how you feel about the man, whether you like him, don't like him, think he's great, think he's not, think, believe his theology, the church was packed, and he's been doing it for how many years on TV?
Yeah. And even like and that's the thing, like, even like, with Joel Osteen, you may not agree with his prosperity gospel message. You may not agree with how he interprets the word, but you know what? I think the only controversy that has ever happened that I know of was when Houston started flooding, and they thought, oh, it would be great to kind of house people within his big, large church to kind of help people who are like now without home and without shelter, and they couldn't get a hold of anybody. And they just said, like, oh, he wasn't willing to open up the doors to his church to help the people who are in his own community that were suffering. Like, and I think that's like more or less like, well, you probably had to call like somebody, and they didn't answer their phone, and they had to probably call somebody. It's larger churches, there's always a system where how do you get Joel Osteen's approval saying, yes, open up the doors, let's have people in there. I mean, and I think later on it's like, well, he never got the phone call, and he didn't know, that there was a need. And if he knew that, he would have did it. Again, I don't, that's a long time ago, so my facts may be incorrect on that. But other than that, like, the guy keeps his nose clean. Besides, like, people not liking his preaching or not liking the message that he proclaims, it's not like he's out there doing a lot of bad things. It's not like, oh, he's sending people away and he's kicking people out and having an under 24/7 surveillance. Like, I don't associate that. I don't see him like, having extramarital affairs. I don't see that happening from Joel Osteen. So yeah, I mean, the guy keeps his nose clean. And that's why when I'm not talking about Joel Osteen, because the guy, again, as far as
I was just talking, I think I was using the metaphor of that just as like a celebrity. Like, you were talking about a little bit before about different guys, like the gentleman that you're referencing that gets on a stream, for example, and he gets 1 million views, right? Yeah. Like, the attractiveness of certain individuals that you see on a regular basis in the limelight of pastoral ministry. And Joel Osteen, I don't have any issue with that. I was thinking, I turned that on. I was like, there was a wide shot of the church that he pastors, and I'm like, wow, 20 years later, and this guy's still packing out this church.
Yeah, and I think that's, and I think that is, he must be doing, whatever their vision is. They're apparently, whatever their vision is or whatever their mission is, they must be executing it great, because you're now starting to see kind of the fruits of everyone coming to that church. I think it was Word of Faith. Is that it? Is that the name of the church? I think so.
Lakewood Church.
Oh, Lakewood Church. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's, so I think that's good. But yeah, I just don't understand when you have people who continue to exhibit certain personality things, continue to exhibit abusive patterns of behavior, why you would still attend that church. Now, Transformation Church is different because they hired Carl Lentz, and as of right now, he's not the lead. He's just like a strategist.
Yeah, he's like about consulting.
He's doing more consulting. So he's not even taking the main stage. He's not even preaching. He's not the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And, and again, I think that's what we're going to kind of find out. Like, even though people are giving a big stink about it, if the restoration process was good and successful, his marriage is still intact, and everything seems to be going well, and he's using his gifts and talents to help Transformation Church with their vision and their mission, then, good for Carl Lentz. I mean,
Yeah.
I still have a lot of questions because the allegations were really serious allegations. But again, and maybe the reason why he's coming in as a consultant instead of a pastor, because maybe he did lose his credentials, so he can't be a pastor. So he has to do the consulting thing because technically he can't have the title pastor, and he can't do the pastoral things because he doesn't have that title anymore.
I just looked it up for clarity's sake. Lakewood Church, Joel Osteen's church, it is among the largest congregations in the United States, averaging about 45,000 attendees per week. The 16,800 seat Lakewood Church building, home to 4 English language services and 2 Spanish language services per week, is located in the Compaq Center in Texas.
Yeah, like huge. So,
not to mention the number of people that get on TV, like views per stream and TV. Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, wild. But yeah, I mean, and I think going back to the question I have, are mega churches bad? I don't think they're bad, but I would say that if you're part of a mega church, and even you got to kind of have good wisdom and discernment, because I know that certain structures and certain how churches are run, like a mega church is going to be run a lot different than a small town country church. The way it's going to be run is going to be completely different. But I think there has to be great wisdom to go, okay, is this just part of how things are run, or is it because it's promoting a lot of more abusive, or even allowing a lot of authoritative behavior, where you're really seeing that even if there are some allegations and you want to go through proper channels, it's like, well, nope, you can't say anything bad about this person because, their word is law. And it's like, well, wait a minute, this is a church. This isn't a cult. So if I see some questionable things within the pastor, I should be able to voice my concerns and not either A, get ignored, or B, voice my concerns and then find out later I'm no longer a member of the church and I'm now signing an NDA before I leave the church. And then have 24/7 surveillance on my family after I leave the church, from the church that's hired by the church I just left.
Yeah, it's a whole different experience working in a larger church. And I know from experience in my own ministry that like it's culture shock going from a small to mid-sized church to a large church, or a large church to a mid to small sized church. And it's like, well, great example of that. Friend Josh is creative arts pastor out in Oklahoma City at Crossings Church. Josh is the pastor of contemporary worship, right? They have a sanctuary service. They have a worship pastor in that venue. They have a worship pastor for young adults and youth. They have a worship pastor for their contemporary venue. They have a worship pastor for their chapel services. They have a worship pastor for their satellite campus. And so like they have teams upon teams, and he has his own admin who handles things, and he has interns that handles things, and he has, sound people and lighting people and streaming people. And like, so all that to say that he doesn't have to do it himself, right? I've worked at churches where I'm the guy that's fixing the sound problems. I'm the guy that's fixing the lighting problems. I'm the guy that fixes the slides and creates the slides and creates pastor slides and makes sure the live stream's working. Oh, and by the way, I have to get up here and say, good morning, let's stand together and worship, and lead worship for a service. And then as soon as I get off the stage after I'm done praying during the message, I'm communicating with people online because I'm literally the only person at the church that's like in that role. Yes, we have volunteers, and yes, people are serving and sound and those various areas, but I'm the person that fixes it when they have to go wrong, or when they go wrong, or I'm the person that's troubleshooting them during the week when nobody else is there. It's just a vastly different working in a small to mid-sized church than it is working in a mega church, because you have teams and you have people that are in those specific areas that will handle those problems appropriately. And it's crazy because it's almost like a business. I was watching a service from Crossroads yesterday, and they're, one of the biggest churches in the country, and they're here in Cincinnati, and I was just thinking, I was like, man, their production is just stellar.
Hmm.
But they've got full-time audio engineers, full-time lighting engineers, full-time worship and creative arts directors, and uh, another guy just happens to be named Josh as well. You know, uh, I met with him a couple years back at Crossroads, and he just sits back at the sound booth and he directs the service. He has his headset on, sort of like I have on right now, and he's like, "All right, lights go here. Sound, we need more electric guitar here and less drums. Pastor's getting ready to come up in 2 minutes," and he directs the service from start to end, and he gives all the cues, and he pretty much directs the show as it's going in real time.
Hmm.
Um, it's just incredible to see how much different large churches
Yeah.
do things versus smaller churches.
Yeah, absolutely. So, friends, as we wrap up, what do you think about mega churches? Do you think they're just kind of, because they're bigger, they have a whole different system and they have to operate a different way, and that's okay? Or do we see them as kind of an evil thing that, kind of contradicts with, kind of what we see? Or is it just kind of the team and how the leadership's trained and how that system's managed? Like, that's kind of a corrupt thing. If it looks more like a business model than necessarily a church model, is that the issue? We don't have the answers. Maybe you do. We like to hear from it in the comments. We would definitely love to hear your responses. And again, we would always read them on the air if you respond. But friends, I hope you have a great week. Hopefully this cold weather that you may be experiencing will eventually turn to warm, and we'll have more warmer days than cold days as the next couple of weeks, especially as we move into the month of May. Friends, thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you later.